So good afternoon. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our joint online seminar by the Department of English and the Research Center for Professional Communication in English. My name is Kathleen Ahrens, and I'm the director of the Research Center for Professional Communication in English and a professor in the Department of English. It's my great honor today to introduce Dr. Jane Lockwood, who will be talking with us about global business English in Asia. Dr. Lockwood is currently an adjunct associate professor in the Department of English at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. She has worked and lived in Asia over the last 25 years, and her research has mainly comprised the nature of business and workplace discourses and assessment practices. She has published research into the specific communication needs of business processing outsourcing industry in India and the Philippines. In her quest to bridge the gap between theory and practice, she has co-authored a course book published by Cambridge University Press for this industry called Contact Us. And what she's going to talk to us today is about her new book, Developing Global Business Communication in Asia. Jane, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, and welcome everybody. It's lovely to be here. And what I'm going to be talking about today is what I actually managed to do with my husband, Neil Elias, who's the co-author. He's a business person in lockdown in London. I decided that, you know, if I didn't do it then, I would never do it. So here is Developing Global Business Communication in Asia. A business simulated case study approach that really attempts to bridge the theory to the practice of teaching business communication. And this is something that is quite close to my heart because I've spent almost 2 decades in Hong Kong teaching business communication skills to undergraduate students and in workplaces. And I felt there was a desperate need to have a course book and set of materials that really related to the needs of Asian students. So this book, Developing Business Communication in Asia, is going to be launched at our Talking Across the World conference that is going to be happening in the second half of May. Through the Research Center for Professional Communication in English at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So this is where it will be launched, and you can get very detailed information there because there'll be a session on it. So without further ado, I'm going to just give you an overview of what we're going to be discussing today. I mean, we're going to pose this question: why another business English course book? Go on to look at issues of globalization, changing workplace practices, the use of technology, and business English as a lingua franca, and how it's enacted in Asia. Going to look specifically at the research because, well, I'll go on to because in a minute. We'll be looking at the language and pedagogical approach that lies behind the construction of this book. I'll give you a quick overview of the syllabus outline and how a typical unit will unfold. Hopefully, I'm going to leave time for discussion at the end so you can ask questions. So why another business English course book? Well, something, as I've already said, we need something that is Asian focused. A lot of the books I found were very American centric or Europe centric. And we needed something, I think we need something here in Hong Kong and elsewhere in Asia that looks at the specific needs of Asian students as they graduate and go into Asian workplaces. Also felt that it was really important to have something that was research informed and authentic. Maggie St. John in 1998 said in those early days that business communication was more materials led than research led. And I think this has just persisted you know, through the decades. There's a lot of research out there now in into business communication, but how much of it sort of finds its way into the materials we use with our students in Hong Kong, for example. To talk about the issue of changing and remote workplace practices globally. And of course, you know, we can look at how COVID has accelerated this, so it's become even more relevant now. We'll talk about the impact of technology on business communication. How has it impacted how we communicate with each other? And the other overlay we'll be looking at is the importance of business English as a lingua franca, and promoting the use of accommodation and intercultural strategies in global business exchange. So these are the sort of things that lie behind why, you know, I put this course together, or we put this course together. So let's just sort of ask this question: what is economic globalization? Well, globalization economically, I know there's political and there's cultural definitions of this, but globalization is the economic process of interaction and integration amongst people, companies, and government worldwide. And you see this manifested in multinational mergers and acquisitions that mean you have dispersed offices all over the world. The business processing outsourcing that I've been working in for the last 15 years, where a lot of work is outsourced and offshored to developing countries such as India, Philippines, Malaysia, Eastern Europe, and China, and South America. It also relates to small and medium-sized enterprises that communicate across borders, and of course, relates to networks of supply chains that have emerged that enable efficient trading. But globalization and the actual nature of the change at work, how has it impacted? Well, I mean, a number of studies have been done where we've looked at new business structures that are replacing old hierarchical structures, termed matrix reporting, where an employee will report not just to one person on one site, but may report to a number of people across a number of dispersed sites. The other changes in workplace practices relate to teamwork and collaboration. All right, so it's critically important, especially when you're in dispersed settings, that you pay attention to teamwork and collaboration. There have been changes in leadership and management style, and I'll pick up on this later because this is being highlighted right now in 2021 as a critical area of communications development going forward. There have been the emergence of, you know, different agency and identities in globalized workplaces that are the result of dispersed types of business entities and the way people are working. There needs to be an understanding of workplace diversities and differences. And here I'm not just talking about cultural differences, but also differences that the people that you're working with in your team, it may be the middle of the night for them. All right, so thinking about location, language, culture, race, and gender are all part of really understanding workplace diversities and differences. Just to throw an anecdote in here, I was working with a large Australian bank recently, and they were managing their offshored offices and workplaces throughout Asia from Australia. And when I was working with the managers down in Melbourne, they didn't realize that their Indian colleagues were actually, working through the night. So even little things like fixing times for meetings is critically important to understand to make this kind of work effective. And of course, the last one here, ability to work remotely and virtually has become critically important in the globalized world, business world. But let's just turn to technology. I mean, over the last sort of couple of decades, there has been a huge development in technology. With 1997, there were 8 million email accounts in Hotmail. And then 2016, taking a snapshot there, which is under 10 years, this increased to 4.9 billion Hotmail accounts, 100 billion business emails per day, and 23 billion text messages per day. So, I mean, there was an exponential growth there, and that has just continued. And now we're in a situation in 2021, which has been accelerated by COVID, I guess, where texting and Zooming are becoming the norm. So this is critically important when we're thinking about, what we put in our business communication courses. I mean, physical meetings are probably a thing of the past to some extent. It's also interesting to reflect that, a couple of decades ago, Scotland and Scotland, who were City U professors, said real business meetings take place in conference rooms, of course, but also in corridors at the water cooler and office coffee machines, on the metro or subway, on the way to and from offices, in airport lounges, at lunches, and in coffee shops. And of course that is true, but within a decade, a well-known English-speaking multinational company reported in 2013 that 45% of its employees international employees are now scattered around Asia. All right. So physicality has really given way to virtuality, right? And within 18 months, post-COVID, remote and virtual communication is the norm in many jobs, including those now with high physical proximity. So I think what COVID has done is really brought physical proximity work like healthcare, hospitality, travel, tourism, even education, now has had to rely on virtual communication. So this is just, ballooning in terms of how people are communicating in English. So there has been some work done in how technology is impacting business communication. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more now with COVID and post-COVID. So, but in Erica Darrick's, myself and Gail Forry looked at virtual communication across globalized work sites and how meetings are enacted. There's been work on multitasking at the workplace, where you're working virtually because you can be working on the phone, working on a screen at the same time. So that issue of multitasking is a new set of skills that in the virtual workplace perhaps needs to be trained for. It's also creating new texts. So chat is now very popular in customer service, and there have been some scholarly articles coming out in the last sort of 2-3 years that are really looking at the nature of web chat and posing that question: is it spoken, is it written, how does this new media unfold in a business environment? So again, it's really important to understand this, so we're able to provide opportunities for our students to to see this and practice this. And of course, social media is being used for branding, marketing, and customer care. And last but not least, artificial intelligence is being used to replace and augment jobs. So I was looking through some recent McKinsey Global Institute reports. McKinsey reports come out all the time. And I like those because they're very research based and give us some sort of interesting numbers in terms of where skills are shifting to and what the demands are going to be going forward. So from a communication point of view, I find these fascinating. This is a discussion paper in 2018, Skills Shift and Automation in the Future of Work, where they say demand for social and emotional skills in leadership and management will rise to 22% of hours worked, with much of this done remotely. So the first question is, how do we enact those skills remotely? Is it the same as face-to-face? Is it different? Interestingly, in that same discussion paper, they talked about basic cognitive skills work like routine customer service, data entry in back offices will be replaced by AI. Now, I think this has an interesting implication for business communications training, because sometimes you see these course books that are quite low level and they're training people to do routine work. Well, routine work isn't going to be there for very much longer. So we really got to be thinking about how we can really improve the communication skills of our students, so they're moving into the kind of high order and more complex communication scenarios and events that they will be faced almost immediately when they go to work. All right, because the grunt work is going and has gone in many places. Last month, there was another McKinsey report that came out, The Future of Work Post COVID-19, where they say remote work and virtual meetings will continue as a norm, with permanent hybrid approaches becoming widespread. And I think we're just beginning to work out in businesses how this hybridity might work. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But very significantly, they said things like high physical proximity jobs like medical care, personal care, on-site customer interactions, leisure and travel and education are being impacted most now. All right. So here is a really interesting area of research in terms of, how that is enacted across these high physical proximity jobs, and what does that mean in terms of training our students to be able to carry these out well. What does it mean for communication? Well, actually, in one of those papers, it was a discussion paper, the two key things are high cognitive skills are in greater demand, and this will be more the case now. So what we're talking about is advanced literacy in writing, critical thinking, decision-making, complex information processing and interpretation, project management, and creativity. All right. In terms of social and emotional skills being in greater demand, advanced communication and negotiation skills, interpersonal skills and empathy, leadership and managing others, entrepreneurship and initiative taking, and teaching and training others. All right, so these are the skill sets that are going to be vitally important in our business communication going forward. So how do we integrate those into our business communication courses? How do we deal with levels of English that are maybe in the lower proficiency band? well, we need to be thinking now about the definition of English. And here, I mean, in Asia, unfortunately, there hasn't been a huge amount of work around the speakers of English in business communication in Asia, despite there being a lot of ASEAN has adopted English as a working language. It's still under research, but I draw on David Crystal's work that was sort of very seminal, I guess, where he reported in 2008 there were 2 billion first language, second language and EFL speakers, and only about 450 million of those were L1 speakers, right? So we know there are a lot of L2 speakers out there, and there are now more L2 business communication speakers and first language speakers in Asia. So what does this mean for teaching business English in Asia? We need to turn our gaze to L2 talking to L2. All right, so where does that leave people like me? So the other thing that I think is really important to put into business communication courses is this whole issue of business English as a lingua franca. And we're not aiming for high level proficiency necessarily, all right? First language speaker norms at a high level proficiency, all right, are some, but perhaps little relevance in most business exchanges in Asian workplaces where L2 speakers are talking to other L2 speakers, and this is the norm, all right? So we need to sort of turn our gaze from looking at just high levels of proficiency to high levels of being able to accommodate in English in a business communication situation. All right. Now we find this, you know, in Asia, we do this as L1 speakers, we're accommodating to lower levels of L2. But do we teach this to our students? Because they are uniquely going to be in this situation themselves. So teaching accommodation strategies, I'm not saying ignore proficiency levels, but teaching accommodation strategies and intercultural adaptability strategies are really important in business communication here. And a number of scholars have written about and around that. So here I've sort of painted a picture of, you know, acceleration from the left-hand column, which is the traditional kind of view of, you know, business communication. We work in hierarchical structures. We talk about formality and informality of language depending on that hierarchy. We talk about physical presence and individual work. There is technology, but most of it's done face-to-face. We've talked about L1 norms and standards as the gold standard, and this has meant focus on proficiency at a high level. And culture has always meant something else, you know, ethnic differences. And of course, Hofstede had a field day over the last couple of decades looking at different ethnic propensities to be doing things in different ways. We've moved on from there, and in the last couple of decades, we're now talking about different work practices, matrix reporting, teamwork, multitasking, all right, at multiple offices, at home, doing stuff virtual, face-to-face. The language is turning its gaze to L2 norms and L2 people talking to other L2 business people. Accommodation, so we're looking from proficiency, moving to accommodation to support business English as a lingua franca. And also there's been a lot of research around intertextuality and interdiscursivity. Vijay Bhatia and Stephen Bremner have done some amazing work in that. They're also Asian based, and how these inform document development in businesses. From a culture point of view, we're focused more on third cultures. I mean, I'm sure many people on this Zoom hesitate when someone says, "Where are you from?" Because, you know, we're all part of a third culture. A lot of us are part of a third culture. So we're more focusing on our similarities and focusing on culture as more than just ethnicity. We're looking at professional cultures, organizational cultures, all right, even personalities, all right. So the business communication is really very much, you know, centered in the middle here, and moving over to this third column where we seem to be just, you know, dynamically moving across, partly because of COVID, where businesses are really taking very seriously the implementation of artificial intelligence within their workplaces. And how we can really improve our use of digital communication in workplaces. This is of you know, very, very high importance. So my question is, how much of the middle and the third is present in our business communication course books at the moment? When I was working in Hong Kong with business communication students, I found that there were a lot of course books that were rather American-centric, that were very European-centric, that didn't question the native speaker as the model that we all aspire to, and cultural differences being rather sort of exotic discussions, you know, based on Hofstede type research. So I think we really moved beyond that, and I think now is the time that we really need to be looking at the materials that we're using with our business communication students in Asia. So I would be, you know, moving into the second and even the third column. So this was, you know, some of the thinking behind the book, Global Business, Developing Global Business Communication in Asia. It is targeted at about an intermediate level, a B2. It doesn't promise to exit them at very high levels of proficiency. We hope that they do that along the way, but I do hope that they develop a really good notion of how to use accommodation strategies in the classroom. So that's the kind of level we're looking at, which is about the level that most of our undergraduate students, from my experience, come into the university and undertake these kinds of courses. It's integrated skills development, reading, writing, listening, speaking. And it's built around a case study, all right? So it's authentic in terms of it focuses on two business entities that move into a business relationship with each other and have a project to do together. All right, so what are the objectives of global business communication? So to explore intercultural and linguistic norms in Asian business exchanges, to really focus on virtual communication as a norm, but with physical presence too, because, you know, there's a nuance that there, physical proximity still matters, all right? It highlights the importance of authenticity and intertextuality in spoken and written texts. And this is enabled by the case study, all right? So the intertextuality is really facilitated by the fact that we're introduced to a limited group of people in both companies, and we build up, information about them, and we build on the exchanges and what we know about them over the course of the course. It takes a second language as well as a first language perspective, where business English is a lingua franca. And it develops an understanding and skills in the use of language accommodation strategies, where the students learn to adjust their communication to different types of L1 and L2 speakers using both. And develops an understanding and skills in the use of cultural adaptability strategies, where students learn to adjust their cultural responses to different national, professional and business cultures. So what are the applied linguistic principles that underpin this book? Well, my background is in systemic functional linguistics, and I've always found genre-based teaching to be really effective in all my teaching. So business genres are modeled, they're deconstructed, and they're practiced in meaningful and authentic contexts. So it looks at how language is functioning in whole texts within these business scenarios. And it's informed by notions of intertextuality, where context and the surrounding network of texts is absolutely key to successful language choice, right? So Stephen Bremner, who was a colleague at City University, wrote extensively about this, and he said, you know, a text is both forward and backward looking and is not generated in isolation, right? So you can't just teach the email or the report, all right? They're vehicles, all right? They're not texts as such. You've got to bring that text alive, and this is the advantage of the case study, because they're very specific contexts in which these texts are generated and built upon from what has come before and what they know in the project that they're working in. He did say, Stephen, but an analysis of 8 currently used business communication textbooks suggests that intertextuality is acknowledged only implicitly, if at all. All right. So you know, he really sort of felt that this was really important and a missing element in many of the materials. In terms of the applied linguistic pedagogical approach, it's based around, again, the SFL teaching and learning cycle, where the genre-based approach models for students the kind of texts, whether they're spoken and written. It then deconstructs those texts, because it then looks at, you know, how they move and what kind of linguistic features are contained in those texts and how they're functioning. And so there's an analysis of them before they're asked to generate them, all right? So the teaching and learning cycle has been very informative as underpinning the pedagogy. All right. So here we have the model, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this teaching and learning cycle, where you set the context, you then model and deconstruct the particular text type you're looking at, then you do a guided construction, and an independent construction comes last. So the activities, the 3 main activities in the book are activity 1, setting the context, activity 2, modeling and deconstruction, activity 3 is the really student-centered work and guided construction. So they're being supported as they go through and are generating business texts in the case study. So what is this this book about? It's based on the story of 2 companies. So we've got Communication, which is a Singapore-based advertising company with key team members based in Hong Kong, India, and the Philippines. And then we've got GlobeNet, which is a UK telecommunications company based in London with an office in Hong Kong. And basically what happens is that there's a competitive process around a request for proposal, and GlobeNet awards the RFP to communication for advertising new products and services to Asian customers traveling and working globally. So it really is the story of this project. So the life cycle of the GlobeNet communication project is the unfolding of the units. It's the project narrative forms the backbone of the 10-unit, 70-hour program. And the sort of skills that we see there are reading and writing, email exchanges, LinkedIn profiles, CVs, cover letters, written as emails, texting, reports, websites, presentation slides, right, are all based on the project, and the skills of listening and speaking. So there's some short speeches, there are pictures, there are virtual meetings, there are physical and virtual presentations, phone exchange, networking events, which is a physical event, are also all based on the project. So here in the 10 units, you can kind of see the narrative where the company and personnel of GlobeNet and communication are introduced. Then the RFP arrives, opportunity knocks for communication, the process of building a business response to GlobeNet, the process of winning the bid, and then building the team, planning the project, working on the project, the big ideas, and then a few problems hit. There's then solution and resolution, and we finish in Unit 10 with the project launch, all right, and declaring success. There are a series of appendices that have all the business words, expressions, etc., that are bolded in the textbook for easy reference for the students to see. There are transcripts, and the recordings are just being finished at the moment, and they will be uploaded. The listening transcripts will be uploaded as an e-resource, and they will be there in May when it is launched. And there's also a reading list, because I thought business communication teachers and maybe even students may be interested in the kind of scholarly research that is happening in this area of business communication, and that's something that they can read, if they have more of a kind of academic interest in what they're doing. So if you look at the sort of syllabus outline, I've just put one unit up here that you can see, but it always starts with saying what the learning targets are, and it also provides a couple of readings and discussion points that are relevant to the work and the topics that are covered in the unit. So for example, business globalization in Asia, the impact on business exchange is the first reading, and then the use of business English as a lingua franca is the second reading. There are academic readings that are suggested, and they form part of the reading list at the back. If they find these sort of taster texts in a way interesting, then they can pursue them. There's also the story so far. So every unit has a little story around the key characters and events that happen in this project story. you know, that just provides a little bit of human interest, but again adds to an understanding of the characters that are in the book, and provides just a deeper understanding of those. Then we go on to the sort of modeling of the text and deconstruction of the text. So in the first one, there's a sort of Globopedia, sort of information text on GlobeNet, and there's a communication website. So this not only provides a sort of introduction to these kinds of texts, which I'm sure they're familiar with, but also provides more information about the two companies that they're going to be working with in that term's work, and also some LinkedIn text. The listening and speaking text is a welcome speech delivered by the CEO of Communication. The output tasks in activity 3, where the students then work on some of the things that they have been considering in the activity 2, is they have to actually write their own LinkedIn profiles in this text, and then they have to do a role play, a networking welcome event that they're encouraged to do after they've been introduced by the CEO in activity 2. So they build on that speech and move into a networking event. What happens in the last part of each unit is there as a reflection exercise. How did I do? What did I find difficult? What's my challenge going forward? And then extra readings there. So that gives you a kind of flavor of, you know, how the book goes from one to the other. Okay, so there are some references, and I have actually gone a bit faster than I thought I might. So I think we've got about 15 minutes to have some Q&A.